Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for choosing to spend your afternoon here with us. For those who don't know, I'm Patricia Faber, and I do a podcast show to help people maximise property values. It's called Maximising Property Values. It's on all the popular platforms, Apple, Spotify, now on YouTube, because Google has stopped hosting podcasts. So they shunted us all over to YouTube, but that doesn't matter. It's on Audible as well. That, however, is usually a monologue. But this is a part of the guest series, which I added around 2 years ago. And my guest today is Sean Hooker. So, Sean, welcome, a very, very hearty welcome to Maximising Property Values. Sean heads up the PRS, which is the Property Redress System scheme. It's a government authorised redress scheme, and Sean's been with the PRS now for 10 years this month. So, congratulations, Sean.
Thank you very much, Patricia.
Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do and why it is so important to the property industry.
Right, Patricia, thank you very much. Right, so basically, as Patricia said, I'm head of redress at the Property Redress Scheme. Now, we're one of two organisations, the other one being called the Property Ombudsman, that are the escalated complaint service for letting agents, estate agents, and property managers. What that actually means is that we actually, if in the case of a complaint going into a letting agent, and that can be from a landlord or a tenant, or if it's an estate agent, a seller or a buyer, or if it's a property manager, a long-term leaseholder, if those complaints go into those agents and they are unresolved and the customer is unsatisfied with the result from the complaint that they've made, it can be escalated to us, and we will make an independent decision on what the result of the complaint will be. So basically, that's what an ombudsman or a redress scheme does, and it's a very useful service for all the customers of agents.
Thank you very much, Sean. Now, the redress scheme also it, it's good practice for people like us, so landlords who let through a company, to be a member of either yourselves or the property ombudsman. Now, where do we actually fit in?
Right. So we are authorised by the government to run a redress scheme, and it's part of legislation. There is no such equivalent legislation for a landlord to be a member of a redress scheme. Now, there are general consumer protection laws that kind of indicate that alternative dispute resolution and an ombudsman are advised for any commercial enterprise, but there is nothing mandatory. But you can join our scheme on a voluntary basis, and several company type landlords have joined. We also have a good number of the property sourcing agents that are out there. So a property sourcing agent is somebody that will source a property for a client, put together a property deal, and then make sure that goes through. They are involved in buying of properties, which is covered under the law. But if you're doing it for lettings, again, that's another area that you can join as a voluntary member. The legislation hasn't caught up.
Great stuff. So, yes, best practice for landlords, because Sean. So Sean is very new to Clubhouse for you veterans who are here, so one of the things that we do on Clubhouse is we try to promote good practice, best standards. So that people can just go about their businesses without having to worry about things catching up with them, or them getting into trouble about things that they don't know. And one of the things that we do advocate is, as best practice, to maybe join one of the schemes, because apart from anything else, it's about getting good advice. It's about knowing that you've got support systems in place, and that's one of the reasons why I was so keen to have you on here. and to be interviewing you for the podcast. So the podcast, I said, is going to be on one of the other platforms. And then people, many people are at work now, I suppose. And like I said, I've not done this for a few years now, the guest series, I mean. So, hopefully they will be catching up later on. Now, where, so with the people who have to be a member of the scheme, if things go wrong, what happens? How does it work out? What are the fines and or penalties, if any, that the PRS can actually levy?
Right. Okay. So we don't levy fines. We make compensation payments or compensation or recommendations for improvements. It's not always financial, so we can kind of instruct an agent to do something doesn't involve compensation, but is something that will make the situation better or right for the consumer. So essentially, it's always the first port of call is always to approach the agent and to go through their complaint procedure. And we insist that they all have a complaint procedure, even if it's a single page of A4. And a lot of you out there, if you're running your little businesses, do have a little complaint procedure. Put your contact details and how you would deal with a complaint, and what happens if you can't deal with a complaint. So basically, if you go through their complaint procedure, which should take no more than 8 weeks. We're trying to we try to get that down, but you've got to give them a fair chance to investigate and to deal with the complaint themselves. If you remain unsatisfied at the end of that process, i.e., they've sent you a final response letter you don't like, or they don't respond to you, you can then approach us, and we would ask you to give us a summary of the complaint, provide any supporting evidence you have to support your claims, and then we will approach the agent to do that. So that's stage one of getting into the process. We will verify whether that we can deal with that complaint, because unfortunately there are complaints we can't deal with. As I say, if a tenant is complaining about their landlord, and the agent has nothing to do with the responsibilities of the landlord, then we can't deal with the complaint. Or if it's a lot of the leasehold stuff, there is the tribunal, and we can't deal with the technical issues on, say, management fees and ground rent, but we can deal with the service issues. Back in the day, when I first started this up 10 years ago, because I came from the deposit protection era, arena, My Deposits, I was one of the founding members of that. We did a lot of online remote adjudication, as we called it. You looked at 2 pieces of evidence, you weighed it up and made a decision. But the more I looked at this, the more I thought, well, actually, pick up the phone and start talking to people and try and get an early resolution to a situation. If you talk to 2 parties that are at loggerheads, and you talk to them individually, and you try and reflect back to them what the situation is and how they can move forward, sometimes those are very often, I've got to have to say, the situation disappears. And in last year, of all the complaints that we've dealt with, almost half, and slightly over half this year, have been resolved that way, without it having to go to a formal decision and then an instruction from me to make a payment or do something. So early resolution is how we approach it in the first place. Of course, if you're still at loggerheads at that stage, it goes to a formal decision, and it's looked at in a 2-stage process. Firstly, by one of my trained case officers, who will look at the evidence. They will weigh up the side and come down on which side that they are convinced are the most likely to be right, or convince them that their position is correct. And if not, there is a final process where it can be appealed if a customer feels that we've made a genuine mistake in law or fact. Then I can have a look at it and review it as a final stage. So it's a very thorough process. We are as fair as possible. We very much signpost people where we can to help them, and we try and manage their expectations. And most of the people who use us are very satisfied. A few are not. So hopefully, any of you out there that have used us are satisfied with what we have done. But we always we always try to do our best to bring the parties together and make them feel at the end of it it's a resolution where there is no winners or losers, but something has been put right, and a relationship may be able to be either continued or terminated in a satisfactory way.
Do you know, Sean, I'm so on board with, the service that you guys actually provide, for just being there. Because having practiced as a solicitor in the past, again, solicitors have, this kind of system whereby you let your customer know from the off that if they have any concerns or anything that they're not happy about, these are the things that they should do in order to try and resolve it. Because anyone who's been in a dispute before will know that it is so time consuming, and not only just it takes up time, and it takes up energy as well. And you just don't need that if you want to be running your business, and with things like that in place, and knowing that, there is a set out path that you can actually follow. I think it's just so invaluable for people. And, a lot of us, again, we don't think about things until there's a problem. But putting these kind of things in place before there's a problem will help us run our businesses more efficiently. And I just really, really love the idea of what you're doing. Now, in the Renters Reform Bill, which we all know has died a death of sorts, um, there was a proposal to have a new to have a third scheme to handle complaints by tenants to do with landlords. Now, is this something that the PRS was maybe, perhaps looking to take on board within its own scheme, or was the PRS looking to maybe, form a third one, for the government? Because, as you said, you were, one of the founding members of My Deposits, and then you've moved over to the PRS. When that became, a thing, when the government said, people, agents had to register with a body. And if the Renters Reform Bill gets revived, and this third scheme comes up, how do you think, you and all the PRS might play into this?
Well, that's a very good question, Patricia. And I've just got to say, 5 years of my life I gave to helping the government to formulate some form of renters reform bill in the form that it actually fell at the last hurdle. And one of them we advocated from the day one is that why do the agents have to be a member of a redress scheme, but the landlords, who in many ways have a lot more responsibilities to their tenants than the agent, why were they exempt from it? So you could opt out of using an agent, and there was nothing like us to deal with that situation. And we really were hopeful that the government had listened to our proposals, um, and for many others, to put together a simple, straightforward scheme that was cost effective and wasn't too overburdensome on either party, and that would actually work and improve the quality and standards in the sector. So the original idea that was put forward was that we had a redress schemes, we had deposit schemes, there were other bodies that could actually help tenants. Why does the tenant have to go looking for all these different remedies in many different places and get all confused, maybe approach the wrong one in the first instance? Surely there must be a way, like when you walk into a hospital and you ask to go to A&E, or you want to go to the X-ray department. I know some of the hospitals aren't quite like this, but most of them, there will be clear signage, there will be clear indication of where you have to go, so you're not wandering around the virtual system trying to find who to help you. And we, the original one, which was coming idea, was to set up a portal, and basically you would go in, have a brief triage as a customer, and then you would be directed to the right body that could help you. That was the original idea, and of course, several elections and COVID and other stuff later, the what came out of it is they wanted a an ombudsman specifically for landlords. To which we said, well, it's fine, but how is this going to work? You are taking a system which involves millions of people, because the sector is that big. So there are millions of you out there, landlords, and there are many, many more millions of tenants out there. How are you going to get a system that is going to work, that is going to be clear, that is not going to confuse people, and is going to be effective? And are you putting all your eggs in one basket by having a single ombudsman? And on top of that, you want to keep us, and you want to have a new homes ombudsman, which is in the process of being setting up. So are you not making the system even more complicated? Should we not go back to the portal system? So I will go back after the election to whoever's in government and say, look, we had a good idea then. Don't try and invent the wheel. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, which the Republic of Ireland did, for example, and they had backlogs of over 2 years on their caseloads. Get in a system that actually works. Use what you've got, and utilise what you've got already. If you've got a landlord who's using an agent, why would you try and find Mr. Smith, who rents a property out in Portsmouth but has actually retired to the Hebrides, and try and pursue him when he has a very good agent to do that? Why would you want to have overseas landlords trying to be confused by the British system when they have a perfectly good agent to do that? And why try and put everything into one pigeonhole? Because the sector is so diverse that putting together the social housing sector and the private housing sector and all the different nuances, student lets, property sourcing, all of these things, why put them all under one body where there's a higher chance of failure, and you might not have the expertise to deal with it?
Wow. Now the thing is, I completely. Sometimes I get so frustrated when I see, policy announcements and what the government might be thinking about, and and I often just scratch my head and think, who's advising them? Do they not have anyone who knows anything about this particular area that they're talking about to even tell them that their ideas are just completely stupid? Um, and you get one after the other after and it's just so what you've said. Anyone would think should just be common sense, and that is what would prevail, but clearly not.
No,
Um,
common sense is not common. That's the be all. And look, to be fair to the government, they did say that the process that they wanted to do, and this was 5 years ago, was to do a white paper. So a white paper is a high level document from the government was together following consultations, round tables, the whole thing. It basically outlines a bill. And a law that they want to make, but it isn't actually a bill that's presented to Parliament. It's a way of actually saying let's lay it out and iron out all the unforeseen consequences, and let's then present a bill that the Parliament can then look at and say, actually, we do all agree because it's been through this rigorous process. Now, to be fair, a lot of that happened. A lot of people out there had input. A lot of very, very, very high level people that know the business thoroughly. Agents like Savills put in a lot of effort. Landlords, experienced landlords, the NRLA, who would represent landlords, Property Mark, all of us, numerous consultations, numerous roundtables, numerous workshops, and we still got to the stage where it became a bun fight, because basically when the bill was ready to go through Parliament, everybody was expecting the general election, and of course we had two very strong camps, the sector camp and the tenant camp, that had a lot of beef together, and wanted to make a lot of it political. So we've got to this situation where we need to take the sting out of it now. I very much regret that it didn't go through this Parliament, but we have now got a chance to kind of to reassess, to go back and make sure that what we have got we keep. So don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we improve on what we've learned through the process and on how we can improve the bill to make it work. At the end of the day, everybody listening to this podcast is going to think, actually, there are 178 rules and regulations plus that I need to know about. This is another thing on top of all the things that I've got. I'm already paying a load of money for all these other compliance things there. I've now got to join more things. I've got to pay more money. I've got to follow more rules. Is that going to improve me as a landlord? Is it going to improve the lot of my tenants? And those are the questions I think have to be fundamental to any bit of legislation that goes out after the new government is formed.
Wow. Right. So, Sean, can I just ask you, because what you've said there is what most of us actually think. We think, there's so much legislation about this and so much legislation about that, and it's hampering us from doing the things that we do best. Now, there's no doubt whatsoever that there are some bad landlords out there. But like you said, there are millions of us and there are millions of tenants. And I often think to myself, what is the percentage of those bad landlords? Now, let me use a slightly different analogy, which hopefully people will get. And this is why I'm very against regulation for everything. So in law, and in the UK, we used to have a capital punishment, and then that was changed and we no longer have capital punishment. But when it was being debated in Parliament, do you know what the argument was? The argument was that it is much better for 10 guilty men to go free than for one innocent man to be put to death. And that has always, when I first heard that, that was, oh gosh, decades ago. But it's always stayed with me about checks and balances. What is the evil on the one hand, and what is the potential gain on the other hand? And with all of this, and you're absolutely right. I didn't know there were 170. Was it three you said, or eight things that we had to be aware of? I just knew that it was numerous, and and I left the law because I thought, do you know what, too much regulation. I can't be dealing with that, and there's something else that I'd much rather do and would enjoy more. And I came into property full time, and it seems as if I actually brought the regulations with me. But jokes apart, anything else apart, do you actually think that and this is maybe slightly political, maybe not, but you are very experienced and you have had the ear of the government, but do you actually think that regulation is a good thing, or do you think it literally is, as you said, and quite quite eloquently, throwing out the baby with the bathwater? um, yes, there's dirty water, but there are some good things that we mustn't lose. And all of the stuff that's been going on for years has made certain people just leave the industry. I'd love to know your personal opinions, and I know that whatever you say as a person is not necessarily representative of the PRS, but it would be great to have your insight, from somebody who is as experienced as you are.
Right, well, Patricia, there's a lot there, but look. Let's look at it essentially at the property market, and actually, it isn't highly regulated. It is highly expected to be compliant. So there's a subtle difference there, and it's as a lawyer, you probably know from English law, we are not one of the most regulated countries in the world. We tend to go down the compliance route. Compliance being that a law is set, and we all have to sit there and obey by it. So the law is written down, and then we've got to abide by it. And then there are people that come around and stop us from doing the bad things, i.e., called enforcement. And that's how we've run our society for many, many years. There are regulated sectors, but most of it, that's how it works. If you break the law, if you don't break the law and you go around your lawful business, then you are perfectly free to do whatever you please. However, if you do break the law, there should be an enforcement agency out there. Now, what we've seen in the property industry is that we have more and more regulations, more and more compliance, but we don't have any enforcement. And what we don't have is the regulatory framework that would actually allow an industry, a sector, to self-govern itself and to make sure that standards were high and that things were being done the right way. And that is where regulation has a very, very positive way of dealing with things rather than against compliance. Now, there's a very good friend of mine who represents the leasehold sector and basically the Property Institute, which now the firms that run property management firms for leasehold and the individuals can join this organisation. He always uses the analogy, and there's a poem out there, and it's called "The Ambulance in the Valley." And it's when the village that was in the shadows of a cliff, and people kept walking on the cliff and falling off and doing themselves a lot of damage. And they got round and said that we need to stop that. What can we do? Well, basically, there was a vote, and the proposal was to install an ambulance at the bottom of the valley of the cliff, so when people fell down, they could be taken to hospital and dealt with. And there was one councillor or one villager who put it in his hand and said, "Well, what are we doing that? Why don't we just put a fence up there? And then when people are walking along, they'll be safe. They won't need to worry about falling off, and we won't need the ambulance and the expensive situation at the bottom and have all these people falling off, an ambulance there 24/7 and then taken to a hospital." And you know, to me, that's a very logical and strong reason to go down a regulation route rather than a compliance route. You could put into place standards, you could put into place a code, you could put into place training, you could put into place a body where it can revise and enforce the regulations, so that if you want to be compliant, you can say, well, actually, what does my code say and what does the regulator say is the right way of doing it? They'll make a judgment on it, and they will put redress and other stuff into place. So that's the difference, the subtle difference, and trying to explain that kind of in layman's terms is very, very difficult, which is why I love that analogy of the ambulance at the bottom or the fence at the top. The people, in the poem all said that it was the most stupid idea was to have the fence, and because they felt that the ambulance was more kind of thing that they were doing, and they were being proactive, and it made them look good that they were doing this, and they could every year they could have a festival to celebrate the great ambulance that was at the bottom there. But the real way to stop the people falling off the cliff was to have the fence, and that would be put in permanently and allow people to have a safe and regulated industry that they felt confidence in. And ultimately, there would be some cost on that, but the benefits back, the trust and the and the returns would pay itself back far more than spending millions and millions of pounds trying to enforce a set of rules that are increasingly complex.
Wow, I love that analogy, and I was literally just thinking to myself, actually, I'm so horrible though, and I don't. The one thing that went through my mind was, well, if somebody is foolish enough to fall off a cliff, surely there were warning signs. Isn't the world actually better off without that person? I know it sounds really horrible, and do you know what, Sean? I've come to the point where I think there's too much that the government, kind of like where it intervenes in how we live our lives. And no government can actually legislate against stupidity and people being idiots. And if somebody falls off a cliff, that is really sad, and that is a hard thing. But education, surely, do not walk near there. Again, nobody now, even if you walk under, scaffolding and stuff, they have to put foam around scaffolding so that people don't walk into them. Now, I can understand about the foam there for people who cannot see, so blind people who are walking around, but they have these wands that help them. And I bet you, in all the years that people have sued anyone for walking into scaffolding, there's never once been a blind person. But anyway, that to one side. Um, I think the more we try and save people from things that they should know, common sense, which, as you quite rightly pointed out, is never common, the worse we become as a society, and people are just not able to do anything. So I completely agree that, from a cost perspective, I think the fencing in, brilliant idea. But I'm just thinking, people can't even think for themselves anymore, um, because the government is stepping in and thinking for them. I don't know. I'm not political at all. I don't even know. But there are certain things I think about them, and I think, but why?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and we're all at the moment, as we're contemplating how we're going to put our X's on the ballot page, on the ballot sheets in a few short weeks' time. We are kind of like mulling over in our heads. What sort of society do we want to live in, and how comfortable we are with whatever. It's not all about policies. It is always about the way that we want to live. And you're absolutely right. In an industry where it is so diverse and involves so many individuals, you know, over controlling it will not necessarily either work or allow the industry to thrive. However, we do know that where you lay your head every single night after you have you filled your tummy and you feel uh, drunk some liquid to make sure that you're hydrated. Where you lay your head is the most human instinct and thing that you need to do. I always say to people, well, what how long does it take the average human being to feel at home? And invariably everybody answers and says, oh, it might take a couple of weeks, it might take a month, it might take whatever. No, and the answer is that it takes roughly about 3 hours. Okay, if you think about it, when you go on holiday, once you've arrived at your hotel, your chalet, wherever, after you have unpacked your stuff and had a look around, got your bearings, okay, gone back, and planned what you were going to do next, you lay on that bed and you say, "That's it. I'm home now. For at least for that week, at least for that few days that you're away." Okay, you feel that that's your base. That's where you're going to feel safe. Where you're going to lay your head when you come back. In the rental industry, this is what we're in the business of doing. You guys out there who are investing, you want to make money for your pensions and your lifestyle, but you also are acutely aware that your customers want to treat your product as their home, and the more you can make them feel that is going to be so important. So we need a system where that is not imposed, but is what most all landlords want to do. Let's say all landlords, because nobody wants to make money surely at the expense of another human being. That's what I would say ethically. Now there are some out there that don't give a damn, but most of us, I would hate to think that somebody was using a product that I was selling them that they absolutely hated and felt was inferior and wasn't up to what the standard that it should be. So that's why I think we need to work so that the rules and regulations work with the industry, and we can work for that kind of sector, and that sector pride. There are very small numbers of percentages of landlords that are rogues, as we call them, but there are a lot of landlords. So there are, because there are a lot of us, there are a lot of bad ones, and that affects thousands of tenants. So we need to actually deal with those, even though the rest of us, the 9 out of 10, are doing the right things.
Thank you, Sean. It is just so true about who would want to make money at the expense of somebody else's life. And that should never be anyone. In fact, it will never be anyone who is in this room or listening to the podcast, because the people in the room and the people who listen to the podcast are people who are doing it right, who want to know how to do it better. And we all kind of like come together. And you're just so right. Now, can I just, this is something that I've had in mind for a while. And I want to kind of like, just pick your brains on this. So, now we have standards in the industry about properties to let. Now, all of my properties are very, very high end, so they would never fall into whatever. So I'm not saying this out of self interest or out of something that is personal to me. It's just something that I've always thought about. Now, with the government sort of like saying, you know what, you must comply with these standards, A, B, C, D, E, whatever. There are some landlords who can't afford to comply. Now, the next thought is, should they be landlords at all if they can't? But you see, what I've always wondered is, with all of these things being imposed, what is happening is, people who can afford it are then improving their stock, which is great. But then they're increasing their rent accordingly, because we're all in business to make money. Um, and that is inevitable. It's going to happen, whether it happens today or it happens tomorrow. It's going to happen. Um, Now, that having been said, I've always thought, why doesn't the government just let the industry like regulate itself, in the sense that there should be certain minimum standards, and they would be safety standards. So I would say, fire stuff that should not be negotiable. But anything else, if the house, because there are builders out there who would happily take on a dilapidated property to rent, pay a reduced rent, and do up the property as part of their rent. Now, but the government doesn't allow that. With the schemes that we have right now, the landlord could be done for letting out that kind of property. And I just think we should let the free market actually take control, because if we did that, it would keep prices down, and it would also allow people to actually engage together and strike a bargain which actually suits both parties. Maybe what the if there was a body that could actually advise the tenant to say, this is the what your landlord is proposing, um, and this is what it means. Or there could be solicitors who would advise, just as they advise when we're buying stuff, and they will do a report on title. We could have solicitors advising, reporting on ASTs or reporting on contracts or whatever it is that those things might be. And if the tenant is happy to take it on, then everyone just butts out. But where we're told, do this, do that, do this, do that, it's increasing prices, and that invariably affects the tenant worse than it affects the landlord. What do you think about that?
I think you've put your finger on a few things there that are absolutely where we probably are at the moment, but we needn't be there. One of the things that I got quite excited about when I was trying to deal with the government on the renters reform was this idea of setting up a digital portal where you could, it'd be effectively a registration, but it would be effectively a way of registering the property rather than the individual alone. And that property, you could put in all the compliance of the certification, but you could also put in a report on the condition of the property and what it needed, and any energy efficiency. But it could be personalised to that property, so that you were getting the best deal for the property, and making it as compliant and as effective as it could be. And we're getting nearer to that, because I talk to a lot of tech firms, or a lot of prop tech firms. There are a lot of kind of people out there who are promising their technologies can solve every problem in the world, but I have seen some increasingly good stuff that does that and takes the burden away from the individual to having to figure it out themselves. We're getting better. So I'm optimistic on that hand, but you're absolutely right. At the moment, the system is that whenever there's a problem, you add another law, you add another regulation that adds unforeseen consequences, and you end up with a situation where an individual's going to turn around and say, actually, this is too much for me. I bumped into one of those landlords where we all bumped into. He's a part-time landlord and he's a London taxi driver, so you can imagine the combination. He was not a happy bunny. He was talking politics and this, that, and the other, and his attitude was had enough. We're taxed to the hilt. We are regulated and having to comply all these things, and yet you then find out that the council hasn't got anybody to go and enforce it. And Joe Smo down the road is getting away with blue murder, and he's able to offer these inferior properties on the black market for half the price we have. Blah blah blah. The morale of the industry on that particular side is very, very low. On the positive side, we have never had a more booming private rented sector market at the moment. If you cannot make money in this environment, you're doing something wrong. Okay. It's easy not to make money because there was a lot of pitfalls that you could fall down, but we have a booming market. In such a market, innovation, improvement, and investment should be rife. Why is the industry not more chipper about that? And because it is a good industry. If you look at the net contribution that the property sector, that sales, lettings, everything across the board contribute to this economy, you would be frightened. It is by far one of the largest net sectors to adding to the economy. Every single economic growth cycle has had property at the centre of it. So they are the positive sides. We've got to just deal with the challenges to make the product of the highest standard that the customer has faith. Landlords and letting agents should not be at the bottom of the approval rating of people in society. They should be up the top. Why not? That's the challenge that we have.
Wow, fantastic. That is exactly what we say. And we think, why are we being vilified? We're propping up the economy. Right. I have a question for you, Sean, from Cameron, who is in the audience. And he says, could Sean talk about some examples of how his team has helped out the property investors when dealing with agents, please? If my understanding of the PRS's task is correct. So this perhaps might dovetail very nicely into the couple of horror stories that I asked if you might want to share with us.
Right. So I dealt with a case very, very recently. It's quite a complicated case because it practically had everything. So it had an agent who had only recently started up. I don't judge, the agents or anybody else, for their motivations or whatever. And also, if they are involved in serious misdemeanor, then that's outside of my remit. And I've got an arrangement with a number of people, including trading standards and the authorities, that if we find anybody like that, we report them. But he put together kind of a rent to rent deal for this landlord who had 4 properties. And this guy lived, the landlord lived in Devon, I think, or somewhere like the West Country, but the properties were in Birmingham. A lot of people have invested in Birmingham but don't live in the area. And the agent had put together, taken on these properties, and he basically done it on a guaranteed rent basis. So the landlord was getting reports from the neighbours and everything of antisocial behaviour and everything, and then discovered that he didn't know who was in his property. And that's what a rent to rent deal is, because the deal is with the agent. So the agent is the landlord effectively. the agent had not really done any inspections. I went and eventually this guy came back and he took back his properties, and he found that they were in an awful state, including when he went up into the loft. He didn't find a cannabis farm, but he found evidence that a cannabis farm had been operated in there. They stripped out all the insulation, and he had to spend a large amount of money on that. So I had to kind of unpick all of that relationship, work out who was the who was accountable to who. He was trying to get things like the deposit back, but the deposit wouldn't have been a deposit because that would have gone to the agent. And eventually, I found that the agent was liable to make good the repairs to the property, because that's the way that rent to rent works. You've got to return the property in the state that you inherited it, regardless of what your tenants do. If the tenants wreck it and you're the rent to rent agent, you're responsible to put it back to the state and then chase your own tenants. The cannabis farm, I'm sure that the agent didn't have anything to do with that, but just look out for that. One of the things that the agent said, well, we don't go into the loft. And that's kind of one of those things that when you have an inspection, you always find out from your agent what are they going to look at, what they're going to investigate, because they're not surveyors. They're going to go around and they're going to do either get an inventory clerk to go around, or they're going to go around for an inspection and just have a wander around. You can easily hide things as a tenant, so you want to make sure that if you're using an agent that they're canny, they know what they're doing. So that's one horror story that we've helped with. Ultimately, we have a remit of up to £25,000. In this particular case, we didn't award that, but we did. It was a high one. We also can't enforce that. So, if they don't pay, we have no real powers. You have to refer to the authorities or go to court. So I'm a bit frustrated on that, but we can kick them off the scheme, and then technically the agent can't continue to operate without being legally part of the scheme, because we tell the other guy's TPO, they then ban them from joining, and they're not compliant. So it's a little bit complicated on the enforcement side, but in that particular case, the agent is now trying to do a payment deal to try and sort it out, because it was quite a considerable amount of money. Whether they will go through with that, I don't know, but we'll see how that one literally evolves in the next few weeks. That's one example. Yeah, again, it's agents not knowing what they're doing. That's exactly where the horror story comes, and then the whole thing escalates out of control.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, I think one thing that lots of I self-manage, and one of the reasons why, in fact, one of the reasons why I self-manage is that when I was working full time and using agents, letting agents, and managing agents, I felt completely let down, not just myself, but also my tenants. And the tenants' welfare has always been important to me, because when I was a tenant, um, I felt that I wasn't treated very well, and I promised myself way back then that if I ever did become a landlord, I would not be that kind of person. So, working and relying on agents and them not doing what they were supposed to do. But I think after hearing so many horror stories from other people, I actually got off really, really easy, because all my rents were always paid. Now, there are letting agents or managing agents who collect rents and don't pay them over, who collect deposits, don't pay them over, who collect deposits, don't register them. You so in those kind of situations, a lot of us will know, but some of the people who listen to my podcasts are people who are looking to come into the industry, so they don't necessarily know, the answers to these things. So it would be great for them, if they do listen to this, to hear from an expert as to what the correct position ought to be, and what the PRS can do, for them if they were ever to find themselves in that situation.
Right, absolutely. So, okay, so just you have to have kind of like a checklist of when you are looking to engage an agent. Actually, part of our group, we also do insurance. So we also run an organisation called and Landlord Action, which is a solicitors firm that helps landlords get their properties back from their tenants. So it's an eviction company but also debt collecting. So we've got a very very wide kind of family of businesses that help landlords and tenants and indeed letting agents. So all of these things are things that are very, very important to the sector. So one of the things that you need to check is, number one, is are they a member of a redress scheme? Number two, if they are collecting deposits, that they are protecting those deposits in a regular a government authorised deposit scheme. There's My Deposits, TDS, and DPS. So you need to keep an eye and make sure that they're doing that. They also have to have client money protection. So the monies, if they're collecting your rent, go into a segregated client account. Of course, if they dip into that or they don't pay that over, they should have the insurance that you can then make a claim against. If they don't have that, avoid them like a plague. In fact, report them, because they legally have to have that. And then what you need to do is you need to make sure that they're sending you regular monthly statements. And just like you do with your own personal bank accounts, you go through them with a fine tooth comb, and you double check that what they are sending you is what they're meant to be. That any bills that any charges that they deduct are accounted for, and you keep your own business, as tight as you possibly can. You're using an agent because you're probably busy. You're using an agent because you want to, you don't want the hassle. You want a professional to do it, and you want the reassurance, but you have to do your own due diligence to yourself. We've just done a kind of a big long article on total landlord insurance. We do regular blogs on there on finding the right agent. I'm promoting that quite heavily on social media, so have a look at that. There's a lot more advice on that. Landlords, if they're going to self-manage, dip in your pocket, get 80 quid out of your pocket or £90. There's always offers on there. Join the NRLA or something like that. They've got a free advice line. They do training. The products that they endorse and recommend are the best on the market, and they're generally good eggs. And they also try and campaign for the right legislative changes. And you're part of a club then, and you can share. That. Join the networks, but make sure that you are very prudent on the advice you get from networks. Networks can be very, very good, but sometimes you get people who don't know what they're talking about and can spread all sorts of rumours from that. So use those networks. There's a lot of information out there that you can get being part of something like that, and you can share your experiences. You're not alone. There are millions and millions of landlords out there. So why try and reinvent the wheel every time you do it? So all of those things you can do in terms of your own management and finding an agent. It's common sense. Find the right agent for you. Some people like the national brands because they like the security of it, but you can find a very decent local agent who would probably be got a smaller portfolio of landlords and will give you more TLC, been doing it a lot longer, so they're not changing staff a lot. But again, if you do find them, try and see if they are a member of something like Property Mark or Ucala or a similar a similar organisation that provides training and support to them, because that's important as well. They need support sometimes. It's difficult. A lot of the things I see with the agents is that they're not bad people. They just they've had most tenants and most landlords are really really good, and that relationship's a golden triangle. Then you come across something you've never come across, and then it suddenly escalates out of control, and they don't know where to get help, and they don't know how to deal with it. It's the unknowns that do you in life. It's not what knowing that you don't know something is better than not realizing you don't know something. So just that's my advice to you.
Oh, thank you. Because my last question was going to be, do you have any advice for us? And you've given it to us. But Sean, where can people find, all the information about, what you've spoken about, the guide to choosing an agent, all of that. If you could just tell us, that would be great, because then that will get captured on the podcast, and
Okay,
will
fine.
be.
Right. So there's on the Property Redress Scheme. It's www .theprs.co.uk, and you go into we've got some knowledge centres in there that you can find out how the scheme works, how to check that your agent is actually a member of us. There's a very similar thing on the property ombudsman, so you can double check if they're not a member of us, they'll be a member of those. Total landlord insurance website. We have a knowledge centre on that. So, and there's a lot of information that is put on that. My Deposits also has a big database of that. The NRLA, go onto the NRLA site. There's a lot of information free to use on that, but once you join, there's a big portal there that you can use and access to them. So there's a lot of information out there. And you say with our with our family of products, we do link them. If you need any help with if you've got eviction problems, Google landlord action. Any of you that follow the industry strongly will have heard of Paul Champolina. He founded Landlord Action. We bought Landlord Action and have improved and made it bigger. And Paul's well known on many social media and national media. And so that's good solid advice that you can get. Be greedy for knowledge. That's what I would say. That's the last piece of advice. Whenever you go into something, be greedy for knowledge. You will always learn something new every day. I do. I know every complaint I deal with, I learn a slightly different nuance of something that I may have known in advance, but I actually find out new things all the time, because every situation is different, and the law is very complex. The industry we are in is very complex, and nobody can know everything.
Wow, be greedy for knowledge. I love that, and I'm going to borrow that from you, Sean.
Steal away.
I just absolutely love that, because it's just so true, isn't it? You cannot learn too much. Be greedy for knowledge. Wow. So, guys who come into our rooms regularly, when you hear me say that, you will know where I've borrowed it from. But I absolutely love it, Sean. Thank you so much for being my guest today, and you've actually revived my enthusiasm for talking to people, on this podcast thing, which I've not done for about 2 years now. As I said, thank you so much. I've enjoyed listening to you, your knowledge, your experience. Thank you for sharing that with us. And people who are listening, Sean has given road signs as to where people can get information. Please do use it. Be greedy for knowledge. Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Patricia, and good luck landlording, everybody.